Good afternoon to you. In the next half hour on the marketplace, we ask, is the business environment ripe to enable businesses recover post-COVID-19? We'll engage the Private Enterprise Federation. Also coming up, some commercial banks welcome the decision by the Bank of Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee to reduce the policy rate to 13.5%. All right, my name is Darryl Kwao. Thanks for being with us. Details after this. Welcome back to the program. Now, Ghana's economy appears to be recovering following the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Several subsectors of the economy, particularly tourism and hospitality, have suffered terribly. But the opening up of the economy due to the easing of COVID-19 restrictions is bringing back life to many businesses. We've been joined via Zoom by Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Federation, Nanose Bonsu, for some answers on happenings within the Ghanaian economy. Great to have you on board the marketplace this afternoon, sir. First and foremost, what's your candid view of the performance of the economy in the first half of the year?
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to share my little knowledge on the economy and how things are evolving. We're better than what was yesterday or the previous year during the height of the pandemic. But we're not out of the woods yet or at all. Because if you look at the credit to businesses, it's not performing even at the level of the previous year or previous 6 months. The economy, businesses are being a little comfortable because of the reduction or because the pandemic has not taken another spike, and our employees are feeling a little comfortable to travel to go to work and also stay at the job. But as you said, some of these businesses like the hospitality and the tourism and all, they're not performing at all. I happen to have traveled around the country and was in one of these hotels in a certain location where there's a lot of tourist attraction, locations where people can go and visit and have a good time. But then the hotel had, I think the occupancy rate is 85. They had only 3 tenants at the time. For the weekend, they had to keep their generator on because the lights power went out. And the generator was costing almost about 1,500 a day. And the fees that they were charging was nowhere near the daily rate that they were paying for the hotel. So these industries have really taken a beating. And the point of how can the government assist in the recovery process, assist businesses so far as easing credit, so far as easing tax payments. Because you remember, during the height of the pandemic, government postponed tax payments for a period. These are things that the businesses can have a dialogue with government and make sure that the government understands the plight of the businesses to enable them to recover fully. Because if we don't, now that competition is coming through our doors, we have to be able to make sure that our businesses withstand the competition.
Okay, what would you say about government's efforts towards recovery based on the policies or the measures that they've put in place? Is it such that it is creating a win-win situation for businesses and the government as well?
No. Yes, government is making the effort because, you know, the government itself is hurting. They have government businesses, they themselves are hurting. But so far as the kind of support to businesses, it's not enough at all. It's definitely not in. It's in the right direction, but it's not enough. Because I'm talking about, look at credit, look at, you know, businesses, bread and butter is money. And if credit is not available to them, that's why. And there's another point measure that we haven't looked at, decision-making by businesses. Business decision-making is based upon the direction in our environment, based on the direction of government. When Nana, the president, won 2016, the private enterprise prejudged what was coming and hosted the president-elect in December 21st to tell the world how he was going to run the country. Now, so appointments to various leadership roles were made as fast as possible. Now, this is June. A lot of the state institutions don't have boards. State institutions don't have the leadership. So people are timid in making decisions, basically because they don't know whether they're going to be there or not. And without that, businesses also react to these agencies, what they do to enable businesses to do. If I look at the credit availability over the period, this same period, businesses are, the credit growth in businesses is 6.6 in January, 7.4 in February, 4.8, and then 6.9, compared to the previous period where you had 13 double-digit kind of growth in business credit. So businesses don't find themselves the way clear to them to make a decision that I'm going to invest long-term or medium-term. So they're just changing gears every other day because they don't know what the policy of government is going to be. That lack of direction on the part of the state institutions who dictate what the state institutions are going to do, and much more, the contract and opportunities for businesses is very critical. And as I said, this is June, and most state institutions don't have their leadership, and the decision-making is now haywire anybody. So businesses are also reacting short-termish in a way that we're not going to do anything until we know our way clear.
Speak of credit, the central bank did something very remarkable yesterday, which some believe will bode well for businesses in the next half of this year, which is to reduce the policy rate to 13.5%. I want to pick your reactions on that, first of all.
Well, it's in the right direction because, you see, the policy rate is supposed to dictate the lending rate by the various lending institutions. But the policy rate in itself has some skewed elements in it that should not be there. Something like cash in bulk. Because apart from the policy rate is formulated, there's a formula that dictates the policy rate. And that formula has cash in bulk, glorifying a bank takes somebody's deposit, they don't know what to do, put it in the vault, and you glorify them a percentage profit margins on that. That is a no-no. That should not happen, be in there. And then the capital adequacy. These are things that the Bank of Ghana should make sure that they're not in the formula. Because if we look at the policy rate, who should have a correlating effect on the banking rate or lending rate, it's not doing that. So you have a margin of almost about 400 to 500 basis points from the lending rate to the policy rate, or from the policy rate to the lending rate. So we think that, yes, it's in the right direction, but the real culprit that we have to work with is how to find a balance on the policy rate, influence on the lending rate of the banking institutions or the lending institutions.
Hopefully, we are expecting that we would see banks readjust to reflect the decrease in the policy rate. But I just want to know, how upbeat is the business community about this? What is your expectation? What is the anticipation as we expect this to stimulate the economy, enable businesses get some monies to run their operations and stimulate the economy? Are you as excited as the others are about what this would mean?
We're not jumping up and down in excitement, but it's in the right direction. Okay. And as I said, that adds up to decision-making process, which is very critical. So the policy rate is in the right direction, it's being reduced, and we want to see a further reduction where you see the policy rate would influence the lending rate directly. There's a direct correlation between that. So businesses can now plan and say, okay, a policy rate is reduced to maybe 10%. We know the margin between that and the lending rate is going to be this much. So now, do we go to borrow now, or we wait till it reflects in the lending rate? So that is where we want to see some immediate action going forward. Okay. And also, as I said, a dialogue platform between government and businesses would enable government to learn as to the challenges businesses are facing left and right. Fortunately, the Private Enterprise Federation and its members had the opportunity to meet the Right Honorable Speaker and his leadership in Parliament. Now that Parliament can create its own private bills and others to see how private sector can influence some of these bills that will change the dynamics of doing business in the country. Because previously it was only coming from the public angle, the leadership and the executive. But now the executive or the private members looking at the terrain and looking at their interest for their constituents will now be able to initiate something that can influence the way we do business. That is something that we think that there must be a consistent dialogue platform between the three forms of government and private sector, because the policymakers should learn the impact of their policies on businesses. And then businesses will also learn how policies are formulated. So there's a balance of action between the two partners.
Okay.
So yes, indeed, the policy rate reduction is great, but it can be done further because it's not going to influence from 20-something to 16, the lending rate, which is around that kind of levels, yes.
At least it's a good start, and government appears to be listening to your concerns. So the final one, as we conclude our conversation, I'm going to ask you about your outlook as we end the first half of the year and we look into the next half of the year. What are your expectations to the business community from the government, from the policymakers?
Well, I will be able to predict accurately if we had this dialogue and to engage government and bring to their attention the kind of things that are plaguing businesses, and especially with the continental free trade competition coming. You know that if the Ghanaians are not empowered, easing tariffs is one, but the tax bite 25% on MSMEs is one of the areas we haven't touched. And so we need a dialogue to bring to the attention of the duty bearers that, look, if you continue to do that, these guys will come, usurp our business opportunities, take away the leverage that we have, make them profit margin, and repatriate the profit home. That is something we want to wake up the policymakers to that. So my prediction or my prognosis going forward is that let's have a dialogue. Let's bring all the difficulty businesses are encountering to the attention of the duty bearers so they can make the right policies for Ghanaian businesses to also compete.
I hope that dialogue happens. And also, Bonsu, CEO of PEF, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate that you could make time for us on the marketplace. Well, you heard Nana talk about cost of credit and whether the banks are going to fall in line. Well, we're hearing from the Chief Executive of SG Bank Ghana, Hakeem Wizani, who has welcomed the decision by the Bank of Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee to reduce the policy rate. Now, according to the bank, it has observed a trend of policy rates and believes this will help the business community. Now, Mr. Wizani told Joy Business that the bank has already taken steps to comply with the new policy directive.
Basically, if you have certainly observed that the trend of the rates in Ghana is progressively going down, okay? It means that just in few years, we can say that there are hundreds of basic points lost in the interest rate, which is good for Ghanaian people, for Ghanaian companies, because they are able now to borrow money cheaper than a few years ago. But it's not the end of the road, because the government and Bank of Ghana strategy is to continue till we will reach the one-digit interest rate. And my hope is that it will happen progressively, once again, taking into consideration many also, because it's not easy. It's more easy to say than to do. But what is good is that the trend is there. So, a few years ago, I think in 2016, I'm not sure that I have the right figures, but in 2016-17, the monetary policy rate was at 25%. So the difference is very big in less than 10 years. So, and continuing this way, we can really expect, and we will be happy to see that this trend will continue, and the final beneficiary of this trend will be the client,
Are the banks ready to comply? Are you ready to comply to also bring your rates down?
We are already complying. The interest rates we are doing today have nothing to do with the ones we were doing a few years ago, for individuals and for companies. It means for enterprises and companies, the rates are really below what it was. Compared to some other countries, the rate's still high, once again, because you cannot change the trend in 1 year. Sometimes it is 5, 10 years, even sometimes more, to really, because if you do it in a short period, you will hurt the global mechanism of the industry and sometimes of the economy. This is why it's also prudent to do things with a good and a right vision of the future, but to do it by step, so that you will achieve the target of bringing the rates down by no sacrificing something big aside,
You're watching The Marketplace. Now, the country's debt has gone up by 13 billion cedis to hit 304.6 billion cedis in March this year. Now, according to data from the Bank of Ghana, this is equivalent to 70.2% of gross domestic product, lower than the 76.1% of GDP registered in December 2020. Now, the domestic debt went up by 163.6 billion cedis at the end of the first quarter of this year, but the external debt remained the same. We are joined via Zoom by former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. It's great to have you, sir, on the program this afternoon. So we worked the math, and the outcome was that each Ghanaian would be required to pay about 10,000, 10,100 cedis. And so I just want to say, if you have that much on you and you can afford to pay for me as well, I'll be so grateful. I'll be so grateful. But hey, where are we headed? Ghana's debt, 304 billion cedis, based on data from March. Where are we headed to?
Well, yes, thank you very much. And, I'm glad you mentioned where we are headed. If you look at the Bank of Ghana, statements critically, and they publish some other information. What is driving the debt? We all know is revenue minus expenditure. You have your deficit. And if the deficit is increasing, or it's not declining, then it means that you are going to borrow. And if you borrow more than you repay, then your debt is going to move on the same trajectory. It's not going to slow. So what is Bank of Ghana telling us? The deficit on a cash basis, it doesn't include arrears, it's about 2.6%. Revenue is still stagnant because revenue, there's a shortfall, 3.6 against the 3.7, for the quarter. I'm talking about the first quarter. Meanwhile, expenditure is about 5.6 against 6.1. And so if you add the arrears and others, you will see that our revenue performance is still just about half of what, we have been the expenditure, and that means that the borrowing trend would continue. And therefore, where are we headed? It looks like there is no immediate respite, with revenue stagnant and the targets not being met. We don't have the full details, so I'm being cautious here, but I'm reading from the tables. The tables on the Ministry of Finance website has been off for some time now, so it's difficult to do analysis. But let me just focus on this. So it means that we are going to continue borrowing. What are other pressures that are? One, we all know that wages and interest rates are taking all our tax revenue, and it is not enough. We are still talking about negotiation, of public sector, salaries. Any adjustments, however minimal, would worsen that situation. We also know, and I listened to the discussion on interest rate. Yes, the policy rate may be going down. But as you borrow, as the government itself borrow, there is complaint already, including your media, by experts who appear about crowding. And therefore, it means that if government and most of the financing before for the first quarter was domestic. Of course, the sovereign bond revenues came in, but the government is, to the extent that there are no plans to borrow externally now, government is going to depend on domestic. We all know that there has been periods in which government could not meet its auction targets, and that means that the borrowing is tight. And therefore, Bank of Ghana may be sending the right signal, but I'm afraid the fiscal is not sending the right signal because the borrowing is going to continue, and that is what matters. Why do I say that? That matters because it is after government has borrowed that there will be credit, to the private sector, and that is what is called, crowding. So it means that the pressure on real interest rates, by the banks, may not abate substantially, for as long as, we have a widening deficit. And so if you look at this, finally, let me just add another one. there's been talk about arrears, far in excess of the 3 billion, which has been, estimated for the year. I have heard one arrears figure alone already being about 3.6, I believe, in the road sector or something to that effect. So that means that, we do not know the full picture of arrears. For example, we all know we've been debating free SHS. Nobody has known the arrears, the commitments that has to be made to free SHS. We all know about the energy sector arrears, which is also very huge. And therefore, it means that these are also far in excess. And these are the pressures, that is facing government and the impact on borrowing. So I'm afraid I don't see an abatement yet.
Yeah, and I want you to talk to me about the debt overhang and crowding and what the effect on the economy is. Juxtaposing that to recent reports, I think we reported this morning, about, or was it yesterday in the morning, about the economy picking up post-COVID-19. So we have a debt situation. We are trying to fix the economy. It appears good. I mean, what is the effect on the economy with our debt situation?
Well, that is positive. I mean, that is truly positive. Why? Because there will be some boost to oil revenue, so long as the prices are also going up. And if our output, remains, stable at close to 200,000 barrels per day, it means that GRM might see a boost in some revenue. And
right.
That would ease the pressure on the deficit. The deficit, which is a problem. You know that the deficit, in fact, the IMF adjusted the debt, that it is the fiscal. So long as it was energy, it meant that you also have to adjust, the deficit. So the deficit at the end of last year was about 15%. So anything that improves revenue, helps. What is not happening is that we are not seeing an abatement or a lowering of expenditure. And therefore, it means deficit will move on marginally. But let me also say that as we see oil revenue inching up and stability in production, it is time for us to be preparing for the next crisis. It is time for us to think about restoring the stabilization fund cap, so that we can have money channeled and built up in the stabilization fund, so that hopefully with 3 oil fields, we will be able to take about 500 million US dollars, not 250, which was accumulated in the past, to face the next crisis. Because you cannot manage an economy, no matter how tough the situation or how well, for 4 years without facing those crises. So I think the PRMA, Parliament should look, critically and begin to restore. Because only when it's restored or channel part of the financing, that is going to come from the oil revenue into paying down debt, via the sinking fund and other, boost up the infrastructure fund so that we can improve capital expenditure. Otherwise, we are not putting much into the real sector of the economy. And so with these caveats, I would say that observation is a positive one.
Okay, because my final question to you was going to be how we can address the debt situation, because when it comes to borrowing, it doesn't look like we are going to stop borrowing anytime soon. We are trying to raise more revenue with new tax measures. I don't know to how far-reaching that would be. You have made some suggestions yourself. If you take a look at what government or how government is approaching this matter, are you confident that we're in the right place?
You see, when you talk about lowering the debt, you have to go to the same variables. Unfortunately, one, you have to increase revenue, right? Yeah. And the revenue that is going to come is external. It's not coming from within GRA, restructuring, GRA, because otherwise it wouldn't be stagnant. So what is going to come is, let's say it's a bonanza from, external. It was external that caused the crisis. External is coming too, but we need some reforms on revenue generation. Then you have to tackle expenditure because it is the combination of the two that gives you your deficit. So if expenditure is not going down and we continue as a nation to spend as though we were in normal times or under the same scenario, I'm afraid the deficit will not go down. And therefore, as long as your deficit doesn't go down, it means that you are going to borrow. It's not going to abate. And if you borrow and if you are channeling much of the revenue that is coming because it's not much, into expenditure, then it means that you are also not putting money aside for building capital for the capital budget, and also you are not putting money aside to reduce the debt, and so all these variables have to come in and play. And then when something external happens, it becomes a boost. And then you can use that to address stabilization, of the economy. So we need a total program. And it's not enough to be picking on, say, just one, like a national identification number or whatever. It must be total. It must be complete in the sense of GRA being moved to the revenue modernization phase. So a lot is being done, by GRA and the government. I must, but I'm saying it is not comprehensive. We don't have a total package as we do have in, say, the homegrown situation, or as we did have if we had IMF programs and the rest. We don't have that yet.
All right.
And we are moving towards the second half of the year, and it's running late, at least, for 2021.
Or better still, Mr. Tekpe, we individually pay our 10,000 cedis and then we see what the Lord will do. But that was supposed to be a joke.
Remember that a lot of people are coming out of crisis. A lot of people with the economy picking, they are now going to end at 10,000, so they don't have it, to contribute immediately.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. That's The Marketplace. Thanks for watching, everyone. My name is Daryl Kwao. Charles Aite, hopefully we'll be back with more of the program tomorrow.